I think there's an argument that could be augmented, for instance, like if you give a 5-point quiz with an augmented tech quiz, like you can maybe figure out different ways for them to answer questions that they wouldn't have before, and they definitely get faster feedback if the computer grades it than if they have to wait for you to check it off. Okay, what we're looking for today in this, if you've even made it this far, because I forgot to mention that the reins are off for this one, everyone. I have no limit on my time, so this could be, I don't know how long it's going to be. Just want everybody to know that, but hopefully it's interesting. Okay, what we're looking for today is to be in this modification or hopefully even redefinition of what we even mean, what this is even trying to do. Okay, and so this gets to the philosophical bit at the beginning, and then I'm going to jump right into the practical applications. Okay, and the philosophical argument that I want to make is that online learning, remote learning, blended learning is not worse than face-to-face learning. It is not worse than face-to-face learning. And in fact, there are things about online learning that are better than face-to-face learning. I am not saying that online learning is better than face-to-face learning, but I'm not saying that face-to-face learning is better than online learning. Okay? They are different. They have different qualities. They have different positives and negatives. Okay? Maybe not for you as the teacher, but for the students they do. All right. And the example I can give is this student Ryan that I taught this year, and I have really good relationship with Ryan. And when I did, I do a good job in class. I would mix up stuff all the time, different structures, different group work every day. We never do the same thing twice. I'm using augmented technology within the class for formative assessments. Da 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 da. Okay. I recognized based on the fact that Ryan's learning went from here to here, that when we were at home, I realized that Ryan was not learning the way that I thought he was learning. And it was because he had figured out a way through the way that I had graded. And I don't even think this was conscious. So I think it's just based on just general comportment, the way that he sort of furrowed his brow when I talked or, took notes. He was a very good kid in class. I could see that he was listening, or at least he thought that he was listening, or I thought that he was listening. I thought that he was trying. And so formative feedback that I was giving him was not really addressing the gaps that he had in the demonstrations of what we were trying to do. Once we came to online, a lot of his habits stayed the same. So he did his homework. He participated in group activities, but because my technology usage was for modification redefinition purposes as opposed to just augmenting what we were already doing in class, I started to recognize he's working in a group, but because he's producing something individual that I can look at qualitatively every class, I can start to say, whoa, he's got fundamental misunderstandings about even like lower level thinking, like misdefining or not having the correct definition of this word, or conflating these two words, or I mean, even something down to like the vocabulary that we had kind of talked about in the beginning of the first class. He was going on a totally wrong foundation with that, and so these activities that I'm about to get into really helped me to recognize that with Ryan and reshape him. Okay, so there are going to be possibilities. Another thing about the online only or the blended learning is that there is a problem in class with the kids being confined to the class. And there's a problem with these four walls. Okay, there's a problem with the time limits. There's a problem that if you have a 42-minute class or a block class, what is done in that class needs to be done then in that room right then. That's the time you have. Okay, and that's the place you have to be in. And this is where they have to sit. And if you do it online, that's not true anymore. Okay, time is different. Do they need to be sitting in a 42-minute class every day on Zoom? They do not. Okay, that if you can modify or redefine the way that you're doing it, the way that asynchronous learning works would suggest that they need to be sitting there for 5 minutes. And then they can maybe use these activities to do things on their own, do things together, and even maybe in a lot of cases get away from the computer and use their phones or computers to come back and report which then just broadens the horizons of what they're doing, and it allows them an opportunity in their real world to demonstrate the skills that they're working on so that they can actually use them in their life and down the road. They are no longer doing the assessment for the assessment's sake. They are no longer taking the test to do well on the test. They're no longer writing the essay to make sure that they're good at essay writing. There are other applications for these things where they're still demonstrating the same skills. They're still learning how to write an essay. These are still, even if they go to college and you are writing an essay for the sake of writing an essay, they will know that, but there are different avenues by which that can happen. Okay. All right. So let's look at a couple of these applications. And one thing I want to do for sure on this video, I'm not going to use any online application that I know for a fact that Arupe Virtual already has a how-to video on. All right, so there might be one or two that pop up that I didn't know there was one, but I'm going to try to use new stuff so that even if you're just looking for a list, you can see these things. And then in the resources that are listed below this video, I'll have another list and also some I wouldn't exactly call it articles, but just some readings, like a couple things that I wrote about difference in strategy between formative and summative. And we'll link that all to this so that if you're just wanting that, you can mute me, never turn on the video or whatever, and just look down at there, click on what you need and see it. Okay, so the first thing I want to look at is a really neat website, part of our campus called iRubric, and whether or not you subscribe to On Campus, you can use the iRubrics, and probably you have this feature on your LMS, but I've just used iRubric for so long that a lot of my rubrics are on here, and I think that like this online rubric system is a really good way to make sure that you're clear with expectations, or even to have students have a voice in the creation of the assessment itself. And so what you can do with this iRubric, this is a Google Lit trip that I did, and we created this rubric, the students and I, for a 15-point Google Lit trip. Might be something to look up if you're not familiar with Google Lit trip, but essentially you are you're going onto Google Earth and you are tracking. Like this works really well with books where there's some degree of travel, like Heart of Darkness or Antony and Cleopatra, something like that, where there's movement out of one place, and usually when that happens, they can track some sort of psychological. Generally, there's a physical change on the road when they move west, but there's also kind of this psychological, philosophical change. So as they're moving, that usually indicates some sort of psychological movement. Huck Finn is another one. As he goes down the river, it's almost like a meter for his maturity. Right? Like the more he goes down the river, the more he has kind of like experienced something off on the side. He's kind of beat that level. He's gotten back on the boat and then moved to the next one, And then by the time he's down at the bottom, he's matured a lot and maybe is more of a man than a boy. Okay, and so the deal here, and I won't bog this down with a philosophy of rubric learning, but I think there's an ABLI video about that. But like to have these rubrics and have a rubric created and even a rubric that everyone works on together online is really going to help the students to recognize that A, you're on their side, and B, to give them real feedback. Even if you're giving a summative assessment, it's in a formative manner. Like you're giving the summative assessment, and I think like this lit trip was, I would call it a summative assessment. It was like sort of at the end of the unit, and they were trying to demonstrate all these things we had learned to do, but they were still getting formative feedback from me in the form of like me checking these boxes, or even them checking the boxes, and then me giving actual like written feedback or verbal feedback for what they had completed, and then marrying it with this rubric, and then they could redo it if they wanted to redo it. So that's kind of a formative thing as well. But I mean, just in short, like to argue that you don't need a rubric would be the same thing as kind of saying like I don't have any standards. I don't really have any reason that I give a grade. Okay, all you're doing is kind of codifying that. You're just saying these are the reasons that I give points, and everybody deserves that transparency. You can't just make up on the fly what something's worth and why. Okay, so it kind of is a regulation on the teacher and the student. They all know they're on the same page. They all know, student and teacher, that this is what we're working for. And again, iRubric, really good one for that. Okay, so the first thing that I would encourage you to do is make a rubric for any kind of semi-formal assessment you're giving. So maybe not obviously every day in class, although you might try, to create, if you're doing any sort of activity, I would have some kind of rubric so that everybody knows ahead of time what is being expected, and then the feedback that you give them, it should be just kind of objective. Like, you fell into this box, and if you don't think that's true, like, explain to me why you're in this. I think it's just easy to create conversation, and it's not so much of like, look, you got a 50% because I decided that was 50%, or you got an 89 because I wanted you to know that I thought you could do better, and I wanted to give you an 89 to like motivate you because you should have gotten an A, and I know you should have gotten an A, but you didn't try, so 89. Like, all this sort of like vindictive and like microaggressions come through with the way that we grade. And again, rubric, big deal. Okay, so here's an assessment, and again, create the rubric ahead of time. But I had some students. We were reading Animal Farm while we were at home, and one of the like sort of content areas, that this was kind of early in the unit, one of the content areas that was necessary based on the ACT standards and based on the standards that my English department had come up with, was that we really needed the sophomores, by the time they had graduated sophomore year, to know, and again, we use that language, but it's just not accurate enough, but to know the difference between different types of rhetoric. Okay, so we just divide it between um, logos, pathos, ethos. All right, and they find that in Animal Farm, right? And they know where the different. Okay, this is an example of pathos. This is an example of logos. This is an example of ethos. But what I also kind of had them do, and this is just using Padlet. So if you're familiar with Padlet, they sort of can drag and drop these. They create these little squares, and they can drag and drop them in different areas, and then everybody can look at these. It's a cooperative bulletin board essentially, but you can put videos, pictures, even just text. And the idea here is that they had to create a product or some sort of PSA, and then create an ad by which they had used all three of the different types of rhetoric. Okay, so here, let's just look. This is a pretty easy one. These kids had done one for like a puppy adopting dog. I don't know what you would call it, a store, I suppose. And they could point to where, and had to write where they used ethos, where they used pathos, where they used logos, and then how that related to the book. And so I can look at this, and I can assess and give them formative assessment based on this. Where, okay, yes, you've done this. Yes, you get full, I suppose, credit for this. Like, you get the points for this. This is just a simple homework assignment. This is one night. This is easy enough for them to do. And I can see that you understand what these things are, because you have kind of now used those to create something, as opposed to just maybe popping it on on a essay question, or you did well on a multiple choice test. This is like an actual demonstration of understanding. Okay, so again, this wouldn't be like a full on summative assessment at the end of a unit or anything like that, but just for formative, for me to understand, for them to demonstrate understanding, I can see that here. And another opportunity maybe would be to actually have them download commercials off of YouTube, or provide links to commercials off of YouTube. So you can go, let's just say you're on Padlet, you can go down here and start a new one, and then press link, and they can link a YouTube video on here that is a commercial, maybe like Super Bowl commercials, and then they would have to analyze it, put their names up here, and analyze the video that they give, and suggest like where those different types of rhetoric are. Okay, now this is in some sense, it's kind of a redefinition of the way that we are using our space. It's a redefinition of the way that we're using our time, because if I were in class face to face, probably my tendency would have been, I'm just going to show a bunch of commercials that I found and then point out where